5 or 6 years ago, I was asked to speak at a meeting. And in 12-step recovery, what that basically means is we tell our story, right? And this particular night, I went up to the podium. You know, we say what it was like, what we were like, what happened, and what it's like now. That's basically what telling our story is. So this particular night, I go up to the podium and I introduce myself, and I give my sobriety date, and I say, and it's a real honor and a privilege to be asked to come here and tell my story tonight. And then I said, as I've been thinking about what I was going to say that night, I knew I was going to go up there and start off by saying it's an honor and a privilege. And then, thinking a little bit more, I asked myself, when I say that, am I really being honest? Do I really mean it? Or is that just something that sounds good? That's what you say when you get asked to speak. Well, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. And I questioned myself, do I really believe that? Or if I really question myself and ask about being honest, do I really believe it's an honor and a privilege for you guys to have me here tonight to be able to listen to me? And this is really just an ego trip for me, and I like the sound of my own voice. So it caused me to do some reflection about what this whole idea of telling our story is about. And because when you think about it, 12-step recovery, widely regarded as possibly the most effective approach we've come up with to overcoming addiction, is based on the simple premise of one person sharing his or her story with somebody else. You know, there's a passage in the big book that says within an hour, an alcoholic sharing his story with another one can win the confidence. You know, not preaching, not teaching. You know, I stand over there and I teach a lot as a professional, not prescribing, but just one person sharing, this is what happened to me, this is what it was like, and this is what it's like now. That has the potential, and it has been what's been the most successful for helping people overcome addiction. And so I started thinking, you know, this telling a story, it's actually a pretty big deal. It has the potential to save lives, just telling our story. And so I got thinking, you know, maybe it is a privilege to be able to, what I started regarded or realized, telling a story is like participating in a sacred ritual that's been being passed down since 1935 at least, when AA started. And you think about how many lives have been saved just because of that. And then the neat thing about it is, it's about saving lives, but whose life really gets saved as a result of doing it? The reason that we share and help others is we're staying sober while we do it. You know, so I got thinking, you know, what a privilege, just the fact that I even have a story to share. But then there's this process that we have that allows us to help others with that, and it keeps us sober in the meantime. So doing that little bit of thinking about what it means to tell our story, I got a little bit of an appreciation for that. I realize it's a big deal. And it really is an honor and a privilege, again, in that 12-step format. It's not professional. I'm doing it because I'm helping myself to do that, but I recognize the value of being there for others. And so the bottom line is, I think that sharing our story is a really big deal. And as a result of thinking about that, every time I've been asked to tell my story from the podium since then, I always begin by saying this whole thing. I call attention to how important I think telling our story is. So, that being said, the reason that I open with that today is we're here to talk about the journey. It's this recovery musical that I wrote. And the most simplistic way of defining what it is it's a musical version of my story. Awesome. Yeah, right. I like that. It's a musical version of my story. Now, Other people will describe it, oh, the journey, it's Jim's story. It's Jim's story in music. And I get a little self-conscious putting it exactly that way, because actually the intention is not to make it about me and my story, rather to demonstrate. My original purpose when I put this together was to demonstrate that it's everybody's story. It's a musical version of everybody's story, that my story is your story, is your story, is your story. And I started figuring that out, first of all, when I got sober and I started understanding what this recovery process is. And I just specifically as addicts, I realized, we all have the same story. The names might be, different, the places might be different, but we basically have the same story. We hit bottom, and something happens, and we have a rebirth or a renewal type of experience. But then, really what we're going to get into talking about today is demonstrating how I started to come to understand that we can see this addiction recovery process as a microcosm of the overall human journey, the human story, that we all go through the same process. That addiction and recovery is just one way that it manifests for some of us. But whether you want to look at it from a spiritual perspective, the spiritual journey of life, we start off spiritually connected. Come from some magical place or the mystery of miracle of life. Part of our human experience is that we lose that connection. We start off in the garden, we get kicked out of the garden. You want to be human? You're going to have a wonderful experience, but there's some stuff that goes along with it. You got to figure out that you're not perfect. And you're going to have some struggles as you go through that process of figuring out that you're not perfect. And your life process is to get back to the garden, is to doing what you need to do to figure out what your imperfection is. Or say you don't want to talk about spirituality stuff. There's some people, I don't like the spiritual stuff. We can look at it from a psychological perspective. Same thing, I think. It's the developmental process of moving from childhood, which is an egocentric, dependent mindset. I'm going to explain that a little bit more here in a second. To the process of moving into what we call a healthy, individuated adult who has a sense of purpose and fulfillment, clear about who they are, our identity. And so again, psychological, spiritual, I sort of look at it as the same thing. And so I end up using I like the term psychospiritual development. So I was thinking as I was preparing this talk today, this is a really heady, intellectual way of defining the journey, as opposed to it's Jim's musical version of Jim's story. It's a musical portrayal of the psychospiritual developmental process that we all go through as part of our human experience. Got that? Anybody need to take a minute to write that down? Musical portrayal of the psychospiritual developmental process. Or you could say, you know what the journey is? It's a bunch of songs that people seem to relate to a lot. That's the most simple way of putting it. So.